Chinese spy who is definitely out in the cold with Prince Andrew, his big close confidant, as one of Prince Andrew's staff called him, also being told he's going to be left out in the cold at Christmas Day because, frankly, King Charles and other Buckingham Palace folk aren't that keen on being seen with Prince Andrew in public after the latest scandal involving him. Well, let's talk about this and the much wider, much more important implications of this with former Security Minister, Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat. A very good morning to you, Tom.
Morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, you, of course, one of the number of MPs who have actually been sanctioned by China over your criticism, quite rightly, of Chinese behaviour over recent years. This story has really come to the headlines because of Prince Andrew's close links. Prince Andrew, as we know, has many a questionable friendship and confidant, Jeffrey Epstein being the least, the worst of them all, but this is certainly not the least when it comes to national security. Now we know that this alleged spy, banned from the country because of his allegations, known only to us as H6, managed to meet up with David Cameron as Prime Minister, Theresa May as Prime Minister, went to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, other places, close links for some 10 years with Prince Andrew. How concerned are you about what access this spy had to possible state secrets?
Well, that's exactly the point, isn't it, Julia? The reality is it's not actually just about one individual or whether that be this particular H6 or whether it's Prince Andrew. It's about the pattern of activity we're seeing coming out of the Chinese Communist Party over many years. And you've been very kind in giving me space to explain this on your show over many years, that this is something that I've seen rising for over a decade now. Because what we're seeing Chinese influence operations, Chinese espionage operations, trying to change the way our debate is conducted in the United Kingdom, trying to steal secrets off companies, which mean that they go out of business as their products are made overseas in China, and indeed how we're seeing the debate in the United Kingdom change, whether that's in academic or, in fact, in some cases, in journalism as well. So this is part of a much wider thing, and that's exactly why when I was Security Minister, I tried to introduce, or in fact I did introduce, forgive me, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, which should have been live by now, but sadly the election came a little bit earlier than I was expecting, and so I wasn't able to get it done before the election, but frankly it was all ready to go and it should be introduced immediately. And
what would that do?
Well, it would create effectively an environment in which people had to register, and MI5 were very, very keen for it because it wouldn't give them the answer, as it were, as to who is a spy and who isn't, but it would create the haystack in which you can find the needle, if you see what I mean. If you want to find a needle in a haystack, first you need a haystack, and this would have built up that haystack. So the level of information that was so important to making sure that we're actually properly protected and properly able to understand the kind of threats against us. So in a circumstance like this, we'd have seen a pattern of activity, we'd have seen the individual either registering in multiple different areas in ways that would be concerning or not registering and therefore committing a criminal offence.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing about China, is that we're much clear about our relationship with Russia. They are a hostile enemy state, effectively. I mean, you know, we are supplying Ukraine with weaponry to hit Russia after their invasion. And yet very, very confused about our relationship with China, largely because, let's face it, we have such a strong economic relationship, as every country in the West does. But China are using their influence, it's not just about sort of gaining a bit of commercial foothold, is it? This is about reaping massive, massive economic power over the world. They're buying up all of the crucial metals. They are, basically making every single country in the West and in the developing world sort of dependent on their largesse. They want to have political power when it comes to where is Europe going to side if and when there is an invasion of Taiwan or anything else, with the US or with China. This is about a long-term political goal for sort of economic dominance of the world. Now, bearing in mind this is a murderous, tyrannical, totalitarian state. It's a police state. It operates in a completely different way from the West. It is extraordinary that we still have our leaders like, Keir Starmer, the first British Prime Minister in quite some years, kowtowing to the Chinese and treating them as if they are a normal Western democracy when they are anything but, and their intentions are anything but good. Why are so many political leaders, academic leaders, media figures, so many influential people in the West, why are they on their knees, prostrating themselves before China?
Well, Julia, you're explaining very clearly the problem, and you're going to get yourself sanctioned because for saying things like that.
Not a country. Again, I would love to go to China. I would not feel safe there anymore. I wouldn't think I would be safe.
I'm afraid that's the reality. You know, I was sanctioned for saying exactly what you're saying. I was sanctioned for pointing out that China is violating the human rights of Chinese citizens. I mean, I would have thought that was supporting the Chinese people, not opposing them. And I'm. You know, I think it's deeply sad that we see this level of aggression towards the Chinese people by the Chinese Communist Party. And, you know, that's the real problem. What we need to be doing in the United Kingdom, you know, it's not for us to determine the policies of the Chinese state within China, but it is for us to protect the British people. And that's why I'm really concerned, not just at the failure to introduce the first scheme, which frankly is reckless not to have it in place already, but also for the discussion that they've opened up on the embassy. Now, Julia, we've spoken about it in the past. There's this idea of having a super embassy in near Tower Hill in the City of London. And this would be a massive platform for Chinese intelligence gathering in London, effectively a base for the United Front Work Department. And it's already been listed as a security challenge or threat by various different agencies in the United Kingdom. Now, it's been refused by the council, but the government has decided to call it in. Now, I'm particularly concerned about this because you watched, as I did, the videos of Keir Starmer with Xi Jinping, Chairman Xi, in the G20 in Brazil. And there was a moment there where they were beginning to do that sort of piece that leaders often do for camera. But the moment that Keir Starmer raised Jimmy Lai, a British citizen who's been illegally detained in Hong Kong, the Chinese officials pushed out the journalists. Now, that may be normal in China, but it shouldn't be something the British Prime Minister tolerates.
Exactly. And they do. And again, there's this whole, we don't want to offend the Chinese because we rely on them and so much investment. I mean, but this is where it goes. And we're seeing, of course, I mean, the massive influence in universities as well, huge amounts of money being pumped in. And that kind of affects the sort of research, affects what's being said, affects the advice that the government gets. I think this is so insidious. I find it absolutely extraordinary that people haven't woken up to it.
Let's just talk about the academic thing for a moment, because there's been, obviously, as you would expect, there's been various different academics who've been silenced because of their comments about Tibet or about Xinjiang. And you may say that you understand that. But there are others who are being silenced because they've spoken up about demographics or about geography or about environmental policies. Now, these are really important policies for the United Kingdom. And if we can't debate them as a free country in our own university, then frankly, that's not just interfering with Chinese policy. It's interfering with British policy. Now, that is much more serious. And it is the job of our government, and I certainly did it when I was security minister, is to protect the British people and to protect British freedoms. That is what I will always do. And I'm afraid I am concerned at the moment that we're not doing that as aggressively as we should be.
Well, indeed. Let's bring it back to Prince Andrew, though, because there's a lot of talk that Prince Andrew has a number of unsavoury confidants and friends. I mean, you know, there isn't a questionable dictator with a lot of money that he doesn't want to glad hand, and he always claims he was doing it as our UK trade envoy, but actually a lot of the time it's rather personally useful to him, as we've seen what's been emerged in terms of his relationships with Epstein and others. Was Prince Andrew just a useful idiot, and how dangerous is it to have somebody who is always desperately in need of cash, we understand, being so close to power and have such access to so many important people, you know, taking people to Buckingham Palace and the like, to be basically able to use effectively, you know, the British royal family name to glad hand with people who could then turn out to be spies?
Well, look, I can see why the Chinese state targeted him, but I think we should be realistic that Prince Andrew doesn't have access to intelligence. It's not really about him. And this isn't specifically, frankly, him who's the threat. The reality is it's about the level of attacks that we're seeing against the whole of the United Kingdom. And, you know, the reality is we've seen individuals connected to the United Front Work Department, you know, in Parliament, we've seen them in government, we've seen them in academic circles, in journalism and business and so on, because the reality is we're dealing with a very, very major plan by the Chinese Communist Party. This isn't a specific targeted operation. This isn't some sort of James Bond style, individual action. This is much broader than that. And if we focus, forgive me, Julia, but if we focus too much on the Prince Andrew aspect, which I understand, and I get why it's interesting, we miss the wider theme, which is this is about the whole of government threat.
This is just the sort of the big name that is attached to this story as opposed to the whole story. Just finally, MPs from Reform UK are threatening to use parliamentary privilege in the House of Commons today to name this spy. H6 is the only way we're allowed to refer to him in the UK due to a British court order, even though he's named not only around the world on the internet, he's also named in China. It's absurd that we should have so much control over this information. We should know this man's name, should we not? Would you support MPs naming him in Parliament, and would you do so yourself?
Julia, look, I'm not going to tell other MPs what to do. I wouldn't do it because I am a Democrat. I believe in the rule of law and I respect the British courts, even when I disagree with them, as I have done quite frequently over issues of a similar nature to this. And I'm not going to name him either because when I was the security minister, I promised to keep the King's secrets, and it's a promise I intend to keep.
You would be breaking the Official Secrets Act at that point.
Well, I'm not going to get into discussions of what I may or may not have known as security minister. You'll understand that. I know you will. But look, I'm not going to be critical of others. But there is a danger again here that we over-focus on the individual and miss the theme. So let's not pretend that this is a one-off. And by identifying him, suddenly we've uncovered some enormous network. No. He is merely the tip of the iceberg. Prince Andrew is merely the tip of the iceberg. They're not, if you like, they're not the story. They're an example of the story. Right.
Very, very interesting to talk to you. Tom Tugendhat, former Security Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's bring Sam Armstrong back in on this. I mean, again, the Prince Andrew side of this is what's been making the headlines for the past 3 or 4 days. And a lot of focus today on Prince Andrew being told, could you please not turn up and do the walk with the family on Christmas Day? And frankly, for most of us, whether or not Prince Andrew is walking with his brother and his nieces and nephews is frankly neither here nor there for most of us, although many people might care strongly about it. But it is another embarrassment for the royal family that he constantly gets himself into these difficulties. But Tom Tugendhat is right, isn't he? That this isn't the big story. The real story is that this is happening on a grand scale, and this is just proof of just how far Chinese tentacles reach into the British establishment. How worried should we be, Sam?
I think very worried indeed. I mean, look, Andrew is clearly a bad, but with him you kind of got to pick your poison. You can either pick the paedophile friend or the hostile spy friend. I mean, it's really that bad.
Oh, and some very questionable, Middle East potentates as well.
Yeah, and I think the British people would like more than one degree of separation between those people and our sovereign, not unreasonably so. But look, on the Chinese question, it's just unbelievable how much this man was getting up to over so long a time. And we saw today in the Telegraph that he was also setting up British private schools, campuses out there in China. His intelligence activities extended to our children. Yeah. Our children.
Well, now, we know Chinese intelligence extends to that because that's what TikTok is.
Well, precisely so. And this is not a regime that has our best interests at heart. Yeah. It doesn't want to coexist alongside the West. It wants to replace the West. Yeah. It would like to restore the Chinese empire. President Xi talks of a century of humiliation over the last 100 years where they're no longer ruling half of Asia. And he won't stop there if he has his chance. And you only have to look on who he's cavorting with on the global stage. President Putin, the Ayatollahs in Iran, North Korea, etc. There is an axis of evil aligning against us, and the longer it takes us to wake up to it, the more painful it's going to be to cut it out.
Yeah, I just find it absolutely extraordinary how many people have got their heads in the sand, but people who, frankly, are in a position to know an awful lot better than they do.